There was a time when television told you when to live your life, not the other way around. Between 1946 and 1986, British television didn't just broadcast programs. If you wanted to watch something at 6:15 on a Tuesday evening, you watched what was on at 6:15 on a Tuesday evening, or you watched nothing at all.
This wasn't about convenience. It was about control.
The BBC, Britain's public broadcaster, wasn't just making television, it was shaping society. And for decades, that meant strict schedules, rigid moral codes, and a broadcasting philosophy that treated viewers less like customers and more like children who needed supervision. The rules started before most people were even awake. Until the autumn of 1986, the BBC simply didn't broadcast during large parts of the day. Morning television was sporadic. Afternoon television barely existed. And in the early 1950s, there was an hour every single evening when television didn't exist at all. It was called the Toddlers Truce. From 1946 until February 16, 1957, every television station in Britain stopped broadcasting between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the evening. Not for technical reasons, not because there was nothing to show, but because the government decided parents needed help getting their children into bed. For 1 hour, screens across Britain went dark. Just blank. Test cards. Silence. The policy was mandated by the Postmaster General, the government minister responsible for broadcasting. The thinking was straightforward, almost paternalistic. If there's nothing to watch, children can't beg to stay up. Parents can establish a routine. Order prevails, and for the most part, people accepted it. Britain was still recovering from the war. Television ownership was limited. In 1950, only 350,000 homes had television sets. By 1960, that figure reached 10 million. But in those early years, the idea that television should be available whenever you wanted it seemed almost indulgent. The Toddlers Truce ended because of money, not philosophy. When ITV launched in 1955 as Britain's first commercial channel, that missing hour represented lost advertising revenue. The BBC, funded by the license fee, had been perfectly content with the break. Fewer hours meant lower costs. But ITV lobbied the government, and on February 16, 1957, the truce ended. The BBC's first program in that liberated hour? A rock and roll show called 6-5 Special. Television wasn't free in those days. Not in the sense we understand now. Broadcasting hours were controlled by law. Before ITV launched in 1955, the BBC could broadcast for just 5 hours a day. When ITV arrived, that increased to 7 hours. By the late 1960s, the law regulated a 50-hour broadcasting week for all channels. It's difficult to explain to someone raised on streaming services. Imagine turning on your television at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon in 1970. Nothing. Just a test card. Maybe some library music. The government believed that unlimited broadcasting would somehow damage society, or at least damage the BBC's finances. So they simply didn't allow it. In January 1972, Christopher Chataway, the Minister for Posts and Telecommunications, announced to Parliament that all restrictions on broadcasting hours would be lifted. Immediately. That same day, broadcasters could finally decide their own schedules. It should have been revolutionary. And it would have been, except Britain was entering an economic crisis. The BBC and ITV expanded cautiously. Full daytime service on the BBC didn't arrive until 1986, 14 years after the law changed. The test card became an icon of British television, though not intentionally. Test Card F, designed by BBC engineer George Hersey, first appeared on July 2, 1967, the day after colour television launched on BBC Two. The girl in the centre was Hersey's 8-year-old daughter, Carol, holding a clown called Bubbles. For 30 years, she stared out from television screens across the country whenever there was nothing else to broadcast. And that was often. During the day, the test card filled hours of dead air, accompanied by library music or a steady test tone. At night, television stations closed down completely. The sequence was ritualistic. The announcer would read the next day's schedule. Perhaps there'd be a weather forecast. Maybe a public information film. Then came the station clock. And finally, on BBC One and most ITV channels, the national anthem played over images of the royal family. Then the screen went black. Transmission ceased. Not because technology required it, but because the schedule said so. If you woke at 3 in the morning and turned on your television, you'd see nothing, just darkness. Television operated on television's terms, not yours. The question of what could be shown and when was taken extraordinarily seriously. In 1962, the BBC Handbook mentioned something new, a watershed policy. The idea was simple but absolute. Before 9:30 in the evening, later standardized to 9 o'clock, content had to be suitable for children. After that time, programming could become more adult. This wasn't a guideline. The Television Act of 1964 formalized it into law. The watershed emerged from a 1958 study by Professor Hilda Himmelweit at the London School of Economics, which found that few children watch television after 9 o'clock. Therefore, 9 o'clock became the dividing line. Before it, language was restricted. Violence was minimal. Sexual content was essentially forbidden. After it, broadcasters had slightly more freedom. Slightly. The first time someone said the F word on British television was November 13, 1965. Theatre critic Kenneth Tynan was appearing on a late-night BBC satire programme called BBC Three, discussing censorship. He said, quite calmly, that there were very few rational people to whom the word was particularly diabolical or revolting. The reaction was immediate. Outrage, complaints, questions in Parliament. The BBC apologised. Television had broken its unspoken contract. Mary Whitehouse had been watching. A teacher from Shropshire, she'd become convinced that British television was destroying the nation's moral fabric. In January 1964, with Vicker's wife Nora Buckland, she launched the Clean Up TV campaign, with a manifesto condemning what she called the disbelief, doubt and dirt that the BBC projected into millions of homes. On May 5, 1964, Whitehouse held a public meeting at Birmingham Town Hall. It was standing room only. The campaign's petition eventually gathered over 366,000 signatures. The BBC dismissed her. Director General Hugh Carlton-Green, who was actively liberalising BBC programming, saw Whitehouse as a relic of Victorian prudishness. But she wouldn't go away. In 1965, the Clean Up TV campaign became the National Viewers and Listeners Association. For over 30 years, Whitehouse coordinated letter-writing campaigns, filed lawsuits, and positioned herself as the voice of millions who believed television had a responsibility to uphold traditional values. She objected to swearing in sitcoms like Till Death Us Do Part. She campaigned against programs showing violence. She even took offense at Chuck Berry's song My Ding-a-Ling. What's fascinating is how much power she actually had. Whitehouse was regularly mocked by comedians and dismissed by the liberal establishment. But broadcasters listened. The threat of her campaigns, the avalanche of complaint letters, the potential for bad publicity, it shaped programming decisions. In the 1980s, after Margaret Thatcher came to power, Whitehouse found a political ally who shared her cultural conservatism. Her voice became even more influential. Children's television wasn't entertainment. It was education. Schools broadcasting started in the 1950s, with the BBC producing programs specifically designed to be watched during school hours. Teachers planned entire lessons around broadcast schedules. By 1980, 96% of primary schools had televisions. Words and Pictures, a reading program that began in 1970, reached an estimated 2 million school children and was used by 88% of infant schools.
After-school programming followed similar principles. Programs like Blue Peter, which launched in 1958, weren't just shows. They were moral instruction delivered through entertainment. Build things. Help others. Be curious. Be respectful. The BBC saw itself as a civilizing force, and children's television was its most direct tool. The schedule told children when their time was up. Children's programming ended at around 5:30 or 6 o'clock. Then came the evening news. The message was clear. This is no longer for you. Time for homework. Time for dinner. Time for family. Television structured the rhythm of family life, and it did so deliberately. The most famous rule-breaking moment came on December 1st, 1976. The Sex Pistols appeared on Thames Television's Today programme, hosted by Bill Grundy. They were a last-minute replacement for Queen. The interview started badly and deteriorated rapidly. Grundy seemed to deliberately provoke them, and Steve Jones, the band's guitarist, responded by swearing multiple times. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the backlash was extraordinary. Newspaper headlines screamed about the filth on television. ITV received hundreds of complaints. Thames Television apologized. Bill Grundy's career never recovered. But something had shifted. The incident revealed that the rules weren't unbreakable. They could be challenged. They could be mocked. And the moral authority that had sustained them was beginning to crack. Throughout the 1970s, drama series like The Wednesday Play and Play for Today pushed boundaries. Dennis Potter wrote plays that explored sexuality and class. Ken Loach created gritty social realism that made Middle England uncomfortable. These programs aired after The Watershed, but they still shocked. They were supposed to. That's what made them controversial, and strangely, what made them important. By the 1980s, the system was unraveling. Video recorders arrived. If you missed a program, you could record it, watch it later, skip through adverts. The schedule mattered less. Then came Channel 4 in 1982, with a remit to be provocative. Sky Television launched in 1989, offering satellite channels that operated outside traditional regulation. 24-hour broadcasting became normal. The BBC began continuous transmission in November 1997. The test card vanished. Close-downs ended. By the late 1990s, the idea that television should simply stop for the night seemed absurd. The schedule no longer dictated when you could watch. Technology was creating a different relationship. Choice, convenience, chaos. It's tempting to romanticize the old system. The shared experience of everyone watching the same thing at the same time. The structure it provided. The sense that television was something special, almost sacred, that demanded your full attention at appointed hours. But the truth is more complicated. The rules weren't benign. They reflected assumptions about class, morality, and who deserved to make decisions about culture. The BBC's paternalism came from genuine conviction that it was improving society. But it also came from arrogance. The belief that a small group of educated men in London knew better than the millions watching what was good for them. What we have now is the opposite. Infinite choice. Television, or whatever we call it now, available constantly. Algorithms suggesting what to watch next. No schedules. No watershed that means anything when children have tablets in their bedrooms. No shared national moment unless something truly extraordinary happens. We've gained freedom,
we've lost the structure.
For 40 years, British television was an exercise in control disguised as public service. It told people when to put their children to bed, when adult content was acceptable, when broadcasting itself was allowed to exist. It reflected a society that believed order and discipline were virtues worth enforcing, even in something as seemingly trivial as entertainment. The rules are gone now. Television doesn't structure our lives anymore because it doesn't need to. We structure it. We binge entire series in a weekend. We watch on phones during commutes. We pause, rewind, skip ahead. The technology serves us, not the other way around. And that's probably progress. But occasionally, late at night, when streaming services ask for the 100th time if you're still watching, there's something almost appealing about the old system. Television that knew when to end, that made decisions for you, that created boundaries. Not because those boundaries were right, but because they existed at all. British television was designed around rules, not entertainment. And for a very long time, that's exactly what it delivered. The screen went dark at the appointed time. The national anthem played, and millions of people across the country simply accepted it. That was how television worked. Until one day, it didn't.